But if you believe there's a God whose mind is behind this universe and behind our minds, then the effectiveness of mathematics is something that I would expect.
John Lennox has this amazing conversation with this atheist, and it's absolutely amazing. So make sure to watch till then, because I have a Bible verse that will tie all of this together. Let's get into it.
Michael, the thing that weighs most with me is not whether my beliefs help me, it's whether they're true or not. I've had, ever since a child, I've had a passion about truth. And at Cambridge, a Nobel Prize winner, and this was the turning point in my life. Having spoken to him at dinner, he took me up to his room and 3 other professors around. He said, "Lennox, do you want a career in science?" I said, "Yes, sir." Well, he said, "In front of witnesses tonight, give up this childish belief in God. It'll cripple you.
Dang.
It will completely throw you out of the running." And he offered me some solution. I said, "What have you got to offer me that's better than what I've already got?" And that put steel into me somehow. I thought, if ever I get the chance to go before the public as a scientist, I want to try to do what we've done tonight. And that is to put out into the public space 2 sides of the argument and let people make up their own minds.
Whereas as a Christian, I would see Heinrich Himmler as deeply evil, whereas I'd see Sophie Scholl as transcendently good. So it's evidence-based in that sense, but it's not proving my beliefs. My beliefs are something that I have through faith. It really is a question, folks, of Saul on the way to Damascus. Saul was not, met by somebody who says, "By the way, Saul, I'd like to introduce you to the ontological argument." I think, if we spend a couple of hours talking this one through, or we talk about the argument from design, and Saul says, "You're right, I'm on the way to Damascus, and now I believe in God." It didn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. It's the gift of God. That's the basis of
But
Christianity.
hang on, Michael. Hang on. You see, Paul was convinced. What was the evidence? An appearance of the risen Christ. That's what started Christianity. It was the appearance of the risen Christ and the fact that there was evidence of the other kind for his resurrection that launched Christianity on the world. And I'm intrigued by your example, the moral example you gave. You see, you mentioned what I would call testability. You can test Newton's laws and all this kind of thing. And I'm constantly up against the question, how can you as a scientist believe this stuff when it's not testable? And I say, who said it isn't testable? You see, why am I sitting here as a Christian? Because I've tested the claims that Christ has made. Let me give you one simple example. We might want to deal with this later on, I don't know, but Christ promises that those who trust him and receive him will receive peace with God and forgiveness and a new life and a new power. I've seen that happen to me and to people endless times. And when you see 2 and 2 make 4 all the time, you begin to believe that 2 and 2 make 4. I think it's eminently testable. And so, to come back on Michael's side for a moment, I think there are different levels of argument, Michael. You mentioned testing laws in the laboratory, but there are many things in science, as we know, that are not testable. You can't test the origin of life in the lab. You have to make an inference to the best explanation in the past. And that is true of many things. So for me, the evidence on which my faith is based is cumulative. Part of it is objective, intellectual, arguments and all this kind of thing. But a great deal of it has to do with the evidence of, does it actually work in life?
I mean, you can't test love. You can't test certain emotions, but we know it's real. We know it's there. We know people experience love. Does that mean that love is not real because we can't test it? And for Jesus, I think there's so many things that we can test and look at the evidence and see it's probably true.
They found increasingly, as scientists, it wasn't necessary and it wasn't very helpful to bring God into the discussion. Descartes says this. Now, the fact is, they wanted to go on believing in God, but it started to make the way possible for what Richard Dawkins has called, you could be an intellectually justified atheist. They were not atheists in the 17th century, but it was the thin end of a very big wedge.
Do you agree with that assessment, John?
To a certain extent. I think we have to recognize as well that it depends what area of your science you're talking about. I'm a pure mathematician. And when I teach pure mathematics, I don't mention God at all. And if I was designing the rocket locomotive that George Stephenson designed, we don't mention God at all. God doesn't arise in the vast amount of the practicalities of science, even biology, where the deeper questions come are, why can we do science at all? What is it about this universe that allows us to do science? And there I would begin to see the fingerprint of a divine mind. So that it's not so much in the mechanisms. Now, there are exceptions to that, because when you raise questions of origins, inevitably, if you look at the history of ideas, you'll see that the question of God comes up a great deal. And God as the one who creates the universe and sustains it. But you'll not find God at the bottom of the piston cylinder in an automobile engine. And of course you won't. And the danger is that because that kind of practical science was so successful in spinning off technology, people then began to take what I regard as a completely illegitimate step, and that is to do away with God altogether. And the main reason for that is the notion that science cannot answer every question. Scientism is rampant today, and I think it's dangerously false.
Just explain what scientism is.
Well, it's the idea that science is the only way to truth. And of course, as a statement, if I say science is the only way to truth, that's logically self-contradictory, because that statement is not a statement of science. So if it's true, it's false. Perhaps it's a bit too early in the evening for logic like that. But the point is this, that many people like Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking regard science as the only way to truth. Well, that would shut down your department of philosophy, and that would be absurd. And Cambridge Philosophy Department reacted very severely to Hawking's statement.
Before Michael comes back on this, I'd just be interested in you teasing a bit open the idea of why can we do science at all? That big question. Because as a mathematician, do you agree with, I think it was Eugene Wigner who said, the universe is written in the language of mathematics. He said he talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics.
Yes, that's a famous 1961 paper that all mathematicians love. But he was wrong, you see.
Oh, okay.
Because the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics assumes a naturalist philosophy. It is absolutely unreasonable that mathematics works if you assume an atheist or naturalistic philosophy. But if you believe there's a God whose mind is behind this universe and behind our minds, then the effectiveness of mathematics is something that I would expect. And of course, Newton, being the genius that he was, this was one of his evidences when he wrote Principia Mathematica. He wrote at the beginning of it, he hoped a thinking person would see that there was a deity from his descriptions of the universe. Kepler said similar things.
I just don't think you're doing that anymore.
Let's have one final comment and we must go to some questions.
Yes, I take the argument for design
That's
in
good. Science is not the only way we can come to truth. It's not the only way we can come to know things. Like you said, philosophy is a major study, and it's also very, very important. And it doesn't answer the questions, how in the world can we do science in the first place? That was so beautiful. Shout out to John Lennox.
directions, not only in one direction. I think of the alternatives. And the main alternative, God could solve that very easily by making us all robots who were entirely deterministic. But what that would do is empty the world of human beings. You and I wouldn't be in that world for the simple reason that, having been given, to some extent, a freedom of choice, we are capable of love. Now, when I have children and grandchildren, and I remember bringing my first child into the world and holding this little girl and saying, do you know, you could grow up to disown me and rebel against me. Why would anybody have children? And I think that God faced a similar problem.
Wow.
We have children because of the potential for love, but we know it can go wrong, but it can only go wrong because the potential for love is there. Wow. Now, I admit that problems like Himmler and Anne Frank are terrible problems, but if you solve them by saying God ought to have made us robots so that there was no love in the universe, well, that would make me think very hard in the opposite direction.
Perhaps we'll get a chance to chase that up during the Q&A. For the moment, would you give a round of applause for both our guests?
That's so beautiful. Would you not have a child because, based off of statistics, it could possibly grow up and rebel against you and do so many wild and terrible things against you? No, because you could have the chance to love this child unconditionally no matter what they do. You wouldn't want to force it to love you. You would want it to freely love you. That's so good. Shout out to John Lennox. He's amazing. John 3:16 says, "For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life." So guys, I encourage you to go to Jesus today. Know that he loves you and he's longing to have a relationship with you.